This weekend, I traveled to Pittsburgh for the Steel City Spectacular, a 20K CDH main event, had a legacy battle for duels and a vintage battle for a Black Lotus. And I won. All right, welcome back, vintage gamers. Yeah, I'll get it out of the way right away. I only won a Black Lotus. This is a picture of me and the top 4 of the event with the Black Lotus, which we did end up splitting for a large sum of money. So I didn't win the Black Lotus straight up, but I did split in the top 4 for a very good tournament weekend. And let's talk about it. It's a crazy weekend. There's a lot of things that happened. Judge calls, deck reg errors, really good magic happening, really nice vintage tournament, a well-run event, and then, of course, there was some amount of drama and spectacular fashion at the end of it. So we'll talk about all of that. We'll talk about what I thought was going to be good going into the event. We'll talk about the meta of the actual event. I have all the data from both events at Steel City. There was a battle for a Black Lotus. There was also a vintage 3K on the Sunday, which I wasn't able to play in, but I do have the data all done for that as well. We'll talk about my deck list. Do I think my choice was good? Do I like my changes? The answer is yes. I think it definitely worked out well for me. And talk about how this affects us moving forward in the vintage format. So let's see. I started this tournament flying in early. Thursday morning, actually. This is the very first time I've flown on a airline called Breeze. It's a bit of a smaller airline, more like Spirit Air style, where it's, you have to pay for carry-on, that kind of thing. But what it did do is gave me direct flights from Providence to Pittsburgh, which I've never had before. It's impossible to get a direct flight to Pittsburgh, typically from the Northeast. You have to go shoot under it or over it or around it and then go there. I don't know why that's the case, but it is. So we were able to put together, Dan Nelson and I, were able to put together a flight from Providence to Pittsburgh on Thursday morning. So we ended up in Pittsburgh very early, something like Thursday at 9 a.m. We had some time to kill. We went and found a cafe, got some breakfast, played actually at the cafe. We played a bunch of matches. Dan was on Combo Raker Shops, the list that I top 8'd with, and I was on the Lur's PO deck. And we played a bunch of testing matches. It was a lot of fun. And then we found a park that had some live music going on. It had a water feature, so it was kind of cooler there in the shade. It was really nice. I played like a game of TFT on my phone. We chilled out, met up with Stu, and got some cool chicken for dinner, some spicy chicken, and then got a very nice early sleep start. Tons of great sleep. It might be the best sleep I've ever had for a tournament. Maybe that's a big factor. Brian Koval is always on. You got to eat. Got to keep yourself hydrated, good food, good sleep, and that definitely helped for this event. So I do have a picture here of my deck to show you. I know you guys on YouTube love a little paper deck list photo. I'm sorry, this one did not come out as good as I thought it did. I took a quick look at it when I took it, and it's a little bit more blurry than I thought. But this is my paper 75. I am a firm believer in as long as the cards work, then they're fine. So I just have various cards that I've acquired over the years, a mixture of foils and non-foils, old art and new art, old frame and new frame. As long as the cards do what it says on the cards, then it's okay for me. This is very much a similar 75 to my Oklahoma City list. In fact, it is only 3 cards different, and the 3 cards are all on the sideboard. I swapped out 2 Steel Sabotages for 2 Consigned to Memory because I felt that people would be playing Tezzeret more often, and I wanted to have more answers for that. And I also felt like I was pretty good at beating Null Rod already with the deck's construction. So I didn't feel like Sabotages were super necessary. And then I swapped out the Gorilla Shaman for a Mind Break Trap, a little bit more of a catch-all combo answer. I didn't expect as much Luris PO at this event after seeing what happened in Magic Online and Oklahoma City, so I kind of thought that there was no more Luris PO mirrors happening, so why do I need a Gorilla Shaman? That one proved to be a little debatable, but it's not like Mind Break Trap is not good in the Luris PO mirror. It's still going to be a good card that you're still going to want to have access to, so not a huge change, all things considered. Let's take a quick look at this deck list just from the text standpoint. I really like this deck list. It's a very consistent, clean, does exactly what you want. I think from the standpoint of flexible slots, I would say I'm playing the one Lorien and one Sink into Stupor combination to find off of your Thundertrap Trainer. I am playing one Chain of Vapor as a catch-all removal spell and mana acceleration. I am playing one Swords to Plowshares main as a way to interact with Frog and Mono White Initiative, with two Flusters as ways to force our combo through. I am still playing a Brainstorm, which I think might be a slot that is up for debate in the future. And then I'm playing only two Baubles and two Opals in the main, with a 2 Tundra, 2 Volk, one blue-white Surveil Land mana base. In the main, the only thing that I was unhappy with maybe is this Brainstorm still. Could be the third Mishra's Bauble. It might also become a Dress Down. I'm a little bit worried I get too many reactive spells if I have a Dress Down and a Swords and a Chain, but Dress Down is just a great card, and its floor is so high that it's probably a decent idea. The consigns were a change. They're mostly there as Steel Sabotages that are split for Jewel, Raker, and Prison Shops. Well, these consigns have a little bit more versatility. They can be good against Doomsday, but the main thing is I can have them against Tezzeret, and they actually counter Tezzeret. So if I'm playing against Raker, Steel Sabotage is not going to counter the Tezzeret. Maybe it'll counter the thing on the way down from the Tezzeret, but I think I'd rather just have Tezzeret 1-for-1 answer right away. So these became consigns. I still have the one Hercules and the one negation, especially when I have a merch scroll. I can find the Hercules. It's going to be quite good against Prison Shops. The Mind Break Trap, like I said, instead of Gorilla Shaman, it's going to be a little bit more wide of a card. I am playing the Plains and the Flooded Strand mana base. I like it, though I'm a little bit worried that because I am harder to Wasteland, then my Volcanics become a little bit more targetable, and then my Pyroblast become harder to cast, as do my Flame of Anor. So it might mean that I have to go up to the third Volcanic that the DMV guys are already playing as in their mana base. I don't know if like my Brainstorm is supposed to become a third Volcanic. That ends up being a lot of lands. Maybe at that point, like a Lorien Reveal or a Sink into Stupor is not going to be good. I don't want to play too many lands. Our deck doesn't want to flood out, really. So I have to consider maybe a third Volcanic Island, because I did like the blue-white basic Island Plains mana base, because it's supporting, 3 Swords to Plowshares, 2 Portable Hole. But I'm worried about casting Pyroblast and Flames against the Wasteland decks now. So maybe a third Volcanic is something that I should be interested in. I think that the Portable Hole, Swords to Plowshares, Pyroblast, 10 cards in, board into control versus Frog is just an unbelievably good pivot. It's going to leave you very favored in the matchup. And I wanted to approach that again this weekend. I had said in my video, my metagame video, that the best deck to play in this tournament was Lurrus Frog. The second best deck to play was Lurrus Pio. And then I thought some dark horses were more things on the line of Jewel and Doomsday. So we'll check out how did I do in those assessments. My reasoning for those assessments was that Frog is just the best deck across the field, and its only bad matchup is Lurrus Pio. Lurrus Pio is very good against the field, not as good as Frog is against the field, but its only bad matchup is Dredge. Like, it's very bad matchup, Dredge. Then Coveted Jewel, I felt like you beat up on all the people who were not playing Frog, really. But you were, you're not great. You're like not amazing against the blue decks, but the Frog deck is the one that you really don't want to see. And then Doomsday is a similar thing where you can beat up across the field, but not be good against Frog. So depending on how the Frog numbers panned out, Coveted Jewel and Doomsday would have a higher chance into the field. But if it was a Frog and PO dominated field, then I would like to be the PO side of that. And if it was a Frog dominated field with like more Mono White Initiative and more other decks, then I would want to be on the Frog side. And so what do we see? What do we got? We have a metagame of 100 players, which I think is an incredible number for not a first-time tournament organizer. Obviously, this tournament organizer is very established inside of the CEDH community. But for Vintage, this is a tournament organizer that people were not familiar with. They were questioning like how well they're going to run the event. And I can say for sure that this was a well-run event. I was, I should probably say up front, I was a special guest at this event. I was given an entry fee to come and tweet about the event. So that is my bias, obviously. But I would say trying to give you a accurate representation of how I feel unbiasedly. 100 players for quote unquote new TO is a great achievement. This is going to put this right now among the most largest vintage events in North America for the year. Obviously, all these events will be eclipsed by Eternal Weekend when it comes around. But for 100 players is an incredible number. I know the TO was looking for a little bit more from that, but we had 100 players for this event and around 50 players for the 3K. Both of those numbers I think are great. And the tournament itself was very well run. Hall was clean and open. They had a bag check, which I really appreciate for these vintage and legacy events to help protect your cards so no one's trying to walk out with your bag. And the rounds moved over pretty quickly. The judge staff was very accommodating. So I think overall, I was quite impressed with the efficiency at which the tournament was run. That being said, what we're looking at for the metagame, we're looking at 20%, 26 when you combine them, Lurrus Frog as the most played deck in the field. This is expected. This is what I said was going to happen. This is a number that is a little bit higher than the number I thought was going to happen. I was expecting maybe 20% total, but still within range of what I thought was going to happen. The next highest deck was a surprise to me, 17% Lurrus PO. So although Lurrus PO is, I would say, struggling a little bit online, it's no longer a deck people are excited to play. It's being played in huge numbers online. In paper, people are still very excited to play Lurrus PO, and 17% is a very high number and lines up really well into the 26% Frog. So 17% Lurrus PO. And then going down the list, 10% Initiative. That's actually quite in line with what a little bit, maybe a little higher than I thought. People don't tend to play Initiative as much in paper as they do online, but 10% is still quite a hefty meta share as the third most played deck here. And then 10% Tinker PO. This is a quirk of a paper vintage event. We actually saw this in the last few paper vintage events, and I've talked about it. The DMV crew is a large contingent from Maryland area that typically registers the same deck as each other. So you saw last year at the NYSE, they all brought Lurrus Volt Key, Oswald Fiddlebender, and raised the percentage of that deck. And then they all brought Lurrus PO with the Astral Legends Planisphere to this year's NYSE. So when you have an event that's only 100 players, and I'm not gonna say all of these were DMV guys, but let's say 7 of them are, have a pretty high meta swing based on what they choose to register. And so we had a large number of Tinker PO decks. These were decks with Tezzeret in them. They were more Volt Key oriented, but they did play Paradoxical Outcome. Some of them were playing things like Balance and Scour the Stars. God, I should have looked it up beforehand. I thought that was the cool, interesting tech. I'm not 100% sold on it, obviously. I was not 100% sold on Astral Legends Planisphere either. Scour. Oh man, this is what happens when you don't. Here we go. Scour for scrap. Sorry. 4 mana. Choose one or both. Search for an artifact from your library and put it to your hand, and return an artifact from your graveyard. This is mostly going to find Time Vault, but you can also find Time Vault, return Black Lotus, find Time Vault, return Key. If someone counters your Time Vault, return Time Vault. So it has a lot of applications. I think the biggest thing that this has going for it is a blue card, so it's going to be pitched to Force, so it's never bad. It is pretty impressive to be playing 4 stock up 4 PO and this card. It's a lot of very clunky cards at your top end, but again, clunky cards at your top end have a little bit more leeway when they are blue. So this is a cool card. Maybe we'll play it on stream at some point, but they always have fun and interesting tech for us. And had a pretty good performance, though I think not typically as good of a performance as they've had in other recent events. So then we had a bunch of smaller meta shares, 6% Jewel, 5% Raker, a couple players on Sphere Shops, only 3 players on Dredge, so that's a pretty low meta share, 3 players on Doomsday, 4 players on Oath. That's a very classic paper thing to have a couple Oath players. And then we saw some other variants of Lurrus, including a Breach deck and 2 players on a Deathrite Shaman Frog deck. Some powerful wizards actually on this one, so maybe we'll talk about it at some point. So yeah, you had these, I think, a reasonably normal looking meta percentages. I think this is very akin to online. The biggest departure, obviously, is that Initiative is lower than online, PO is higher than online, and then Lurrus PO is higher than online, and then Tinker PO actually showed up in Force at this event, with the idea that Tezzeret was going to push it into a powerful spot. How do these decks do? Did I hit the spot in terms of my predictions? Well, Lurrus, especially only Esper Lurrus, which is this is again kind of funny because this is a flip of online. Blue Black Lurrus had a really poor event, where Esper Lurrus had a very good event. This is again flip flop of online. Online, Blue Black Lurrus seems to have a better time than Esper Lurrus. I don't really know the reasons. It could just be variance. But Lurrus Frog had a good day. Solid win rate as the most played deck. Lurrus Pio also had a really good day. Solid win rate as the second most played deck. Then you get down to the Tinker Pio, which is obviously 7 to 10. What was it? 20%? 7 to 10 players less. Almost half as many players as the other two, with a 54.5%. So a very strong win rate for the Tinker Pio decks. I will say I think that's when you consider maybe the DMV team is maybe a stronger team than the average percentage of the field. And when you look back at events that they've had, like the Lurrus Volkey tournament where they had, I think it was closer to 60% win rate. I wouldn't even consider this to be a great performance. I'm not sure. They didn't have anyone in the top 8. I don't know all the names of the people who are in that team. But they did have a lot of people at 5-2, 4-3. So I think like an overall strong performance, even if it didn't push anyone into the top 8. So you have that happening. Initiative, decent play rate, but again, not a very strong performance. Jewel Shops struggled, and that kind of makes sense if you think that these Esper Frog decks are going to be good into Jewel. If you think Lurrus has a decent matchup against Jewel. When you end up with this many blue decks at the top and this many initiative decks, I don't think this is actually a good metagame for Jewel. I know I said that, but I think the number of decks that don't fall into the free wins for Jewel category made this a tough tournament for Jewel. Again, I don't exactly know why the 6 players who played Blue Black Lurrus had a struggling time. Could just be like a small sample size player thing. The 5 players who played Raker had a great time. Obviously, this is a small percentage of the field, 5% of the field, but a very strong performance for Raker. Multiple players in the top 8, another player in top 16. So very strong performance from Raker. And then all of these other decks that people chose to register for the most part, not too great. Oath, Dredge, Doomsday had a horrible time. Too many Frog decks. Way too many Frog decks. I did play against a Sphere Shops player in the late rounds. So the 2 Sphere Shops players actually had a pretty decent day. I actually don't have it in here, but the Lurrus Breach player was in the top 8. So there would be a high number for the Lurrus Breach player. And then the Bug players, both the Deathrite Shaman Lurrus ones and the Bug large ones had a combined 59% win rate here, so some amount of indication that there might be something to playing Deathrite Shaman and Collector Roof into this metagame. If you look at our top 8, we have a top 8 of 4 Lurrus Pio, 1 Lurrus Breach, 1 Lurrus Frog, and 2 Raker Shops, both of the not both of the normal variety. I would say this Raker Shops was a stock Raker Shops list. This Raker Shops I think had Pios in it. Not forces, but Pios. We can probably take a quick look here. Yeah, so there were Pios and Tinker in this Raker Shops list, which is quite interesting. Were there creatures in this list? Okay, no, there weren't creatures. There were Mox Opals. So this was a combo shops list with Pios, Tinkers, and Mox Opals. So that's very different from the normal Raker Shops list. And then Dan played my version that I top 8'd with, which had the defense grids. So this was, defense grids and smelting vats. So 3 different Raker Shops decks in the top 16. Very interesting things to think about if you are a Raker Shops player and how you want to build that deck going forward. So yeah, Lurrus Pio dominated the top 8 of this event, but it didn't have an overwhelming win rate or anything like it did at NYSE. Lurrus Pio had 17 players, and a bunch of them did very poorly, so it kind of balances out. When you have a large meta share, then getting into the top 8 is much more likely. I will say that Esper Lurrus control probably did, a lot of these things are like tiebreakers, 1 round difference. So like when you look down here at top 12, you're getting 3 more Frog decks that missed on the top 8. So overall, but then, you had a lot of Frogs down here as well. So there's just a lot of things to think about when you don't want to always just look at top 8, right? Like Alex, Breaker is out of top 8 here with Frog, but that's another person that could have been in as Frog. So I do think it's probably decent to talk about the Lurrus Deathrite Shaman's deck. This was played by Joe and HJ. So those are two powerful wizards, obviously. So it's, you know, tough to take that as a sign for anything. But this was a really cool deck list. This is the Kishla Skimmers inside of the Deathrite Frog Bowmaster. This is basically the idea that I was playing on stream a few weeks ago, and obviously refined and tuned with the dazes and spell pierces and pushes, numbers, that kind of thing. But this is a deck that's, I feel, fairly interesting into the current metagame, being able to shut down the artifact combo decks and have this crazy good draw engine with Frog and Skimmer. Something to think about for players who are interested in playing a controlling Wasteland deck. I'm starting to go back here. So yeah, here you can see all of these PO players at 4-3, 4-3, 5-2, 5-2, 5-2. So that's why you got a very strong win rate for the Tinker PO players. So yeah, I would say I mostly nailed it. I mostly nailed it with the predictions. I will say that I guess I only get half credit, right? I said Lurrus and Frog. Lurrus, Frog, and PO were Lurrus PO were the best ones. I didn't really put Tinker PO as much on the map as it was. And then I obviously, with my two dark horses, failed to really convert. They had really poor showings. So Covenant Jewel and Doomsday, which are decks that I thought might be pretty good if they had, Frog number was kind of low. Frog number was not low, obviously. So those decks did poorly. So I don't say I was like wrong on those two, but obviously there were qualifiers to if they could do well, and they did not do well. So. But yeah, we're in a spot where, like I said, I still think this data represents how I feel the format stands, where Frog is the best deck, but not by a huge amount. And the best deck against Frog is PO, but not by, like, but it's like one of the only good decks against PO, but it's not as good. Sorry, one of the only good decks against Frog is the Lurrus PO deck, but it's not as good against the field as Frog is. And then there's a variety of things that have decent chances. I think the Raker Shops one is one that stands out as interesting. Raker Shops did not do as well in the 3K that followed on the Sunday. So this could be, a bit of variance, a bit of catching people by surprise with the different combo variants. I don't know. Obviously, once you start getting down to these small numbers, then there's a lot of individual pilot variants, which is why we never look at one deck, one event as some kind of signifier for the tournament, for the field, what am I trying to say? Signifier for the format. That's the word I'm trying to say. It's just a single snapshot. That's why I really like the MTGO data, where we get to add it all together and see broader strokes. That being said, the MTGO data has some flaws in it as well. We have, similar players playing every weekend. We have way more mono white for whatever reason. Like this I think is a much more representative mono white. But here in paper, when you have proxies, this is a 15 proxy event, Dredge is basically nowhere to be found. I guess I didn't talk about that at all in here, but I played 0 Dredge hate in my sideboard, because for these events that are proxy paper events, people don't show up with Dredge. Obviously, the Dredge was higher than I expected in Oklahoma City. It was like 9% of the metagame. But here, we had 3 players on Dredge in the entire field of 100 players. So that really paid off for me. I don't think I'm going to be able to do that for Eternal Weekend. Eternal Weekend is a no proxy event, which pushes people to play Bazaar that can't find the other pieces, find power. So you end up having an artificially high number of Bazaar players at Eternal Weekend. I'm going to have to try to account for that when I maybe build a Lurrus PO deck for that tournament. But like I said, it's a pretty normal, pretty reasonable snapshot. Like Initiative and Dredge came way down. Lurrus Frog and Lurrus PO come way up. But for the most part, like the most played decks are the most played decks. And metagaming, using the online data and then slightly adjusting it for the proxy level of your paper event seems to be a good way to go for future metagaming and deck choices. Let's take a quick look at the 3K that happened on the Sunday. Like I said, I flew out using Breeze, so we had a weird flight on Sunday that was getting us home kind of early. So we actually ended up missing this one. So Dan and I did not play in this 3K, but it was a 49-player 3K with similar percentages. This is 28% Lurrus Frog. Way lower Lurrus PO here. I think a lot of the Lurrus PO players were playing maybe other formats or something, but way lower on the Lurrus PO, like half as much Lurrus PO. But there were still a bunch of the Tinker PO players here at 14%. Again, low numbers of Dredge, reasonably high number of Jewel, pretty normal number of Jewel, but only one Raker Shops player in this 49-player event. So similar things going on here. When you look at the graphs, you can see that with Esper at the top, another high percent win rate, but nothing like crazy high. Tinker PO had a bit of a worse day as the second most played deck this time. Blue Black Lurrus had a much better day, So, average those two out, 54%, obviously quite high, best deck in the field, very confidently. Jewel had a better day than the Lotus event, 48%. Luris Pio had a better day, but had way less players. So, a lot more variance in this number when you have 49 players and only 4 players play Luris Pio, and the 4 players that play Luris Pio are, Tyler, who's always in the top 8 of different vintage events, Gabe, who top 8'd the day before, and then there was another Luris Pio player that's somewhere around the top 2 that, a bunch of names that I had are very frequent at the top of the paper deck lists. There were some other decks here like Tinker and stuff that had some interesting weights, but mostly more of the same, I would say. Similar strokes from this event, which makes sense because you're typically only going to bring one vintage deck to any given event. So yeah, lots of cool things happening. Obviously a very powerful top 8. I'll talk about that when we get through the round-to-round recordings of each of my individual rounds. What I'm going to do is I'm going to go through all of my rounds. I have notes for most of my rounds, and we'll talk about what was going on at the time. When top 8 comes around, we'll talk about what happened during the top 8, and that's going to be the way I'm going to go through this tournament report. I'm only going to do vintage this time. Normally I do my I add on the legacy, and I also played like a CEDH event. But neither of those events went particularly well. I dropped after 3 rounds in Legacy, and I did not win my pod for CEDH, so I decided not to take notes and to give myself a little bit of a break. So we're just going to go over all of the vintage rounds here. What I'm not going to go over is the rounds that I was on camera on Feature Match. I have 2 rounds, round 5 and the top 8 where I was on camera. What I'm going to do is make those its own video. I'm going to go through the camera footage and talk through the spots, see what I can remember from my hand, see if we can't learn anything from those spots, and maybe just do a little bit of a deeper dive on what was going on in those events, or those rounds. Those rounds were quite interesting. It was round 5 versus Luris Breach, and round 8, the top 8 versus Esper Frog. And I think both of those rounds were 3-game sets that had, or not, they were not both 3-game sets, but they were both rounds that had at least things worth talking about during them. So we're going to start with round 1 versus Joel. All right, let's talk about round 1 versus Joe. Joe hit us with quite the brew here, and we have seen this online before in the past. I'm not sure that I made the one-to-one connection that this was what was happening, but Joe has a very cool homebrew Reanimator / show and tell blue-black deck. I think a workable archetype in this space. You can see kind of cool things going on here with the forces and Thoughtseizers, but also, show and tells and stock ups to up the blue count, Entomb, Reanimate, Ponders, the main deck and sign. So a pretty cool looking deck list here. What I see across the table is a blue-black, it was like an Underground Sea start and no Luris revealed. So what I put my opponents on when they have a blue-black start and no Luris revealed is some kind of combo deck. It's either going to be a Tinker deck or it's going to be a Doomsday deck. But either way, your game plans are going to be similar. And obviously, while this is neither of those 2 decks, a lot of the same things that I'm going to do for a Tinker deck in terms of play patterns and counters, I'm going to do the same thing here. So I led with a turn 1 trainer, and my opponent uses DT. With my trainer, I believe I revealed a Flusterstorm. So my opponent knows about Flusterstorm, and they DT for an Ancestral anyways, because you can kind of play around Flusterstorm knowing that your opponent has it. And so I bait them into a spot where they go for the Ancestral thinking they can pay for Flusterstorm. And what I do is I cast Chain of Vapor on my trainer to up the storm count. And then I use Flusterstorm to counter the Ancestral. I then use my second Flusterstorm to counter the stock up. And then I'm super far ahead with a new trainer to play, tons of trainers. So I just use my trainers and put up some more counter magic. And my opponent won't really have the velocity needed to come back from that number of counter spells. So it was cool though. Got to use the Chain of Vapor for alternative use case. Didn't really see like that much from what my opponent was doing other than like stock up and blue black. So I just boarded in a way that was going to be good against Tinker stuff. And it just so happens that my opponent's deck, while not on Tinker, is on Show and Tell, and Show and Tell is going to get hit by those Flusterstorms and that kind of counter magic in a similar way. There's also the fact that even though I didn't see any Entomb Reanimate stuff, I don't even have any Graveyard Hate in my sideboard to combat that anyways. So I'm just playing you know, the negation and the mind break trap and just playing a controlling role. In game 2, Joe hits me with a Thought Seize on my Flusterstorm, and I go for an early 4th Airlingus for 1. This happens a lot. You kind of can take this role where you get to play a Delver style strategy. You cast 4th for 1, you take the Monarch, and you just use that, try to keep the Monarch the whole game while playing a bunch of counter magic. And you don't even have to go crazy with, you know, doing PO and that kind of thing. Like, I'm not going to be super worried about getting null rotted out of the sideboard or anything like that. So, you know, I'm tempoing, I'm drawing, you know, I'm dealing 2 damage every turn, I'm drawing an extra card every turn. And then some really cool things happened where my opponent cast Shieldred. And I was like, well, I don't really want Shieldred to resolve. I don't want to lose the Monarch. I don't have to deal with this. I'm drawing extra cards every turn. So I counter the Shieldred with like a Force. And then my opponent Shallow Graves the Shieldred and takes the Monarch back. Takes the Monarch. I'm like, oh shit, now I need to make sure I get the Monarch. And that's okay. I'm gonna get the Monarch back. I feel like I'm gonna get the Monarch back because, you know, I already have my 2/2 in play. So that Human Knight can already get the Monarch back. And in the long term, I can always have Lurrus get into play and Lurrus gets the Monarch back. I go to attack with my 2/2 to steal the Monarch back, and I get Long Goodbye, which I wasn't exactly expecting. And I talked to Joe a little bit about it, but like I don't particularly think that like Long Goodbye against like the Trainer, Otter, Snapcaster, Lurrus deck is usually what you want to be doing as a combo deck. I think you normally want to try to attack Lurrus PO by stopping their combo and by pushing through your own powerful elements. But yeah, it was really good in that exact spot because the Long Goodbye killed the Night token and I couldn't take the Monarch right away. But like I said before, the next turn I can just buy Lurrus and play Lurrus and get the Monarch back in short order. So my opponent does get to make, you know, a couple extra draws off of the Monarch for a little while. But once I regain the Monarch, I basically just counter every spell my opponent has, and I end up winning this match. When I go into round 2, I'm playing against Joe number 2. You guys, this time it was Jewel. I don't have the right deck list here because it's got like a deck list submission error from maybe Top Deck where it's the EDH deck instead of the Jewel deck. But I can guarantee you that Joe number 2 was on Jewel. It was a really weird set of games. Game number 1. Joe led on Mana Crypt, and I had to choose whether to counter Mana Crypt or not. It's hard to choose because when your opponent doesn't reveal Lurrus, and your opponent might be on Mono White initiative, then, you know, countering Mana Crypt is totally correct. But if your opponent is on like Jewel or Raker, then you want them to you want to counter their threats. So I decided to let the Crypt resolve, and my opponent plays a bunch of artifacts, and at the very end plays a Tolarian Academy and a Simulacrum Synthesizer. Which I have to choose whether or not I want to counter. Because it doesn't do anything right away. It's a Scry 2, but then every time a larger artifact resolves, you're going to start getting huge constructs. So I do decide that I want to counter the Synthesizer, and that ended up being a really strong play because my opponent didn't actually have a lot more action in their hand. They had, you know, some Sync in a Stupor and some Forces and those kind of things that they can cast off of the Tolarian Academy, but they didn't have, you know, more Jewels or POs or Rings or anything like that. So I actually get to play some control against a low action opponent. I use my Lurrus to bait some of his counter magic. I got a Sync off of it and a Force off of the Lurrus. I just let those things go. So I like had a Vexing Bauble that I could get countered, and once those things got countered, then I just cast PO in 1. Game 2 went completely the other way. I molded to a 6-card hand that has Ancestral. It's not a good hand versus Jewel because you want to have counter magic on your opening hands versus Jewel, but I had an Ancestral. It was already on 6, so I kept it, and my opponent went turn 1, the One Ring, and turn 1 Karn, and so I just conceded on turn 1. There was no point in playing that game out. And then game 3 happens, which I think was much more interesting. Opponent resolves a Ring on turn 1. I resolve an Ancestral, and afterwards, I have double Force and Mind Break Trap. So my opponent activates the Ring at least twice, and goes for a Jewel, which I have Force Trap on. So I'm able to win the fight for the Jewel, and I start building out my mana. I go to my turn, and now the Ring has been in play for 2 turns. And what I do is I choose to Hercules back the Ring to my opponent's hand to buy a bunch of time. Then we come back around to is my opponent going to cast the Ring or not, and chooses instead of casting the Ring to cast Jewel, which I win a fight over with I think I have a Force left and a stock up, so I force the Jewel, I untap and use my stock up to draw PO, and I draw through my deck, and I ended up winning that game. That game, my opponent does get another ring trigger, so I couldn't win right away. So what I end up doing is I just draw through my whole deck, bounce and destroy as many things as my opponent has in play, put together a lethal attack on the next turn, and then pass the turn with 7 mana and multiple counter spells in hand. You'll end up doing that a decent amount in matches when people are playing the One Ring. Just because you can't win the game on the same turn, PO doesn't really care about that because PO can draw through its whole deck and just play a bunch of spells. So all you need to do is draw through your whole deck, get to the point where you have a bunch of mana, Time Walk with Tolarian Academy, use your Flame of Anors and your Chain of Vapors to clear out the opponent's entire board, and then you have your 7 counter spells in hand when you pass the turn with a Tolarian Academy and 30 open mana, and it's not going to matter too much. We go on to round 3 against Alex. Let's see if we can grab Alex's thing here. I'm hoping we can grab everyone's deck list from now on. We'll see. Please. Yes, here's Alex's deck list. Esper Frog with Lavinia's. Pretty normal looking Esper Frog deck. In game 1, I make a classic fun play where you go just turn 1 Island Brainstorm. It's a play Legacy players will hate, but in Vintage it makes a lot of sense in certain situations. In this case, I needed to find Metalcraft. I had a Mox and a Mox Opal, but nothing to turn it on. So my Brainstorm happens and I find Mana Crypt. And so from there I have Mox, Mana Crypt, Mana Crypt, and Mox Opal. I can buy Luris and hold open Fluster, and I basically overpower my opponent with a PO with Flusterstorm backup. Game 2 happens. My opponent had a turn 1 Lotus hand that had a very early Luris plus double Frog, and also had a portable prismatic ending for my portable hole, which was really strong. Just immediately exiling that portable hole, bringing back a Frog, and on the turn where my opponent went Luris with the Lotus, played the second Frog. Played the ending to get the second Frog, and played a Deafening Silence. So I was like, I can't get out from underneath this Deafening Silence. I have these too many frogs in play. Alex is drawing too many cards. But I'm almost able to get back in the end. I ended up exiling 2 of the frogs, but I didn't find a removal spell to resolve against the Luris in time before I died. So moving on to game 3, I cast early stock ups and got a bunch of lands and removal. I did a bunch of fetching for basics, and I played trainers over and over again. Because my opponent was kind of locked underneath their own Null Rod. Basically, they went for Mox land Null Rod, and then they were forever kind of stuck on 2 lands. They used a 3rd land to wasteland me, so they never really had a 3rd land. And this is a very classic Luris Frog post-board match against PO. What you're going to do is you're going to actually just play fair. Your opponent's going to index heavily on things like Null Rod and Deafening Silence. And when they're doing that, you're just casting trainers, casting stock ups, trying to hit all of your land drops and get to the point where you have just a better card draw engine than your opponent. You have tons of removal. You have 3 Pyro, 4 Swords, 2 Portable Hole, 2 Flame. You just make sure a Frog never hits you, and your stock ups are just going to be stronger than your opponent's not being able to draw cards. So you just play you go a little bit larger, and you play a little bit of a bigger controlling game, and in that way, you're going to be really favored post-board. You're not going to play Force because you don't actually want to force any of their spells. So you're not going to 2-for-1 yourself. And it just forces them into a hard roll because you still have the ability to go Mox, PO, but you don't need to go Mox, PO. You can just play Trainer. You can just play Stock Up. And that's how I really like to approach the Frog matchup, and that's how I was able to vanquish Alex in round 3. We move on to round 4 versus Gabe. Gabe ends up top 8ing this event and top 8ing the event the next day, the 3K on the Sunday. This is just the Unlucky Monkey version of Luris PO. It's got the Demonic Tutor Splash and mostly all of the same stuff going on here. I don't think anything super crazy is happening here. So we play a Luris PO Mirror. Game 1, it's a very low resource game, a very cool game. Where both of us are playing trainers off of 1 land, maybe 1 Mox. I had an Academy, but no Moxen, so I kind of made maybe a poor choice where I chose to stock up, and I stocked up into double Moxen. And I had a bunch of choices here because double Moxen gave me the ability to turn on my my Academy and cast another stock up with Flusterstorm back up. However, if I do that, I can't hold up Fluster on their turn. And I didn't feel like I needed to hold up Fluster on their turn. I felt like I wasn't in danger of dying per se. And I wanted to really build up my mana. And I could still get to the point where if I cast stock up with the 1 mana from Academy floating, I could find, Moxen and cast another trainer. I could find Pio. I could find Opal or Sapphire. So I was like, I think there's enough range here where going Mox and casting a stock up makes a lot of sense. So that's what I did. And I did end up breaking out to the point where I didn't get to hold up blue mana for Fluster, and I didn't even find a force off of I think I made a play double trainer. Or I played stock up into trainer. So I just kind of missed on all of those things, and my opponent hit me with the really powerful combination of draw Mox, trainer into Time Walk or another Mox, Time Walk into a stock up into PO, and just crushed me. So I don't know if this was exactly a play mistake. It's something to think about, the cost benefit analysis of holding open Fluster from that spot. And I don't think I can realistically die if I hold up Fluster from that spot, but I am I am giving my opponent more time to establish what did happen. That being said, I think if I had to go back, I probably would not have done that play. I think if I hold up Flusterstorm, use my Flusterstorm in a reasonable manner, I can still go on to the next turn with a huge abundance of mana and stock up and look for a win that way. So I think that was one of the few major mistakes I made over the course of the event, but it was one that stuck in my head. Game 2 and 3 were a lot less interesting. Game 2, I was a super high roll hand with the Mana Crypt Sapphire on turn 1 into a stock up Ancestral. The game is just over because I drew all the best cards. Those are the games that happen, and you just have to brush them off as the opponent, and you just move on. So game 3 was more, I think I may have just picked really good timing windows in comparison to my opponent. I found really good windows where I was able to, Pyroblast my opponent's Ancestral, and I have Fluster Ancestral of my own, and I get just eke out advantages that way, and eventually I just have overwhelming PO advantage. It's very important to look for spots to try to get 2 for 1 where your opponent casts a good spell, you cast Ancestral in response. If they force back or do a Pyroblast back, you can Fluster the whole stack, that kind of thing. So I was able to beat Gabe here in the mirror in round 4, which means I'm 4-0 going into round 5 versus Ryan. Ryan, I think this is the first time I have met Ryan. Ryan plays a bunch of other formats. He's a very strong player. I was really impressed actually watching Ryan play his round 4 match to get to this point. He was playing a matchup, and he used a Consign to counter a Flusterstorm trigger, and was able to suplex a Grafdigger's Cage and find a nice avenue to Underworld Breach. I'm not going to review this match because this match is on camera. I'm going to go find that on camera match and do it in its own video more in depth. But it was a pretty good match. It was 3 games set. I definitely didn't play perfect. I think there were a couple spots where I'll definitely talk about things I could have possibly done better. But I do want to talk about Ryan's deck because Ryan does end up in the top 8 of this event and the 3K on Sunday. And this was a matchup I did not want to see again in the top 8. I was really hoping someone else would take out Ryan for me because this is a very controlling version of Luris Breach. We've got double suplex here as a removal spell / exile the One Ring spell. Not the full set of Frog, but 3 Frogs. Full set of stock ups, a bunch of Lorians, Pyro and Spell Pierce in the main, double negation in the main, Vamp Tutor, and then a heavy number of breaches, 3 breaches, a lot of breaches. So this is a really interesting build. This is not what people are typically playing in Luris Breach in the field right now, and Luris Breach in the field is probably just in general underplayed. And this is a very controlling deck. Obviously, there's no Wastelands in this version. So it is maybe it leans a little bit more on the combo kill, but you don't have to combo kill here when you have Luris and you have Frog and you have Underworld Breach for value. Definitely saw a bunch of Underworld Breaches for multiple Ancestrals instead of going for some kind of combo, especially after you exile your freeze to Force of Will. And so I think this is a really cool list. If you are interested in playing a more fair Pyroblast Frog deck, this is a place I would start. I think there's a lot of room for optimization in here. I don't think this is a list that's any amount set in stone. So definitely take a look at this list if you are interested in playing some kind of maybe Pyroblast-oriented Frog deck. We'll talk about more about this in the other video. But suffice to say, the main deck, Pyroblast, Negation, Spell Pierce combo deck was quite good against me. I didn't have any I normally have Soul Guide Lanterns in my sideboard that I bring in for Dredge that come into this matchup and are quite helpful, but I didn't have any of those this weekend, so I do end up losing to Ryan on feature match at 4-0, leaving me at 4-1, and I'm still probably in a spot where if I win my 6th round, I am able to draw into the top 8. So I lost my other my other thing here. So if I go look here and I find my round 6 matchup, Killian. This was a this was a mess. Let's be honest here. Killian it was a great opponent. This was a workshop, prison shop, sphere shop style deck. No rods, sphere resistance, aggro creatures, that kind of thing. And a bunch of things happened in this event, and they're all my fault. Let's put it that way. They don't happen until game 2. So let's start with game 1. Game 1 happens, and I probe my opponent, and my opponent's hand is Workshop, 2 Sphere Resistance, Crucible of Worlds, Patchwork Automaton. I think on 6. And so I'm looking at my opponent's hand. They can only cast 1 spell a turn with their Crucible until they draw more cards. And so as I have Probe, I have a Force of Will. I might have had 2 Force of Wills. It might have been 2 Force. I think I had 2 Force of Wills in my opening hand. So I was going to play a slower game and try to establish my mana. And so my opponent does interestingly lead on Crucible. And I'm like, damn, is this a bait? Is my opponent like next leveling me? Because if they haven't drawn a land, this Crucible doesn't really do anything. But what I actually didn't think about, and I talked to Killian about after, was I think I may have led on basic island fetch or underground, not underground sea, but tundra. And so my opponent, realistically and reasonably said, well, you could be on frog. I want to resolve Crucible first so that if I get wastelanded, I don't immediately lose the game. And I think that's totally correct, but I didn't even think about that at the time. I was just super worried about a wasteland lock. And it did actually turn out that Killian did draw the wasteland that turn. So I forced the Crucible, and I was lucky because they had drawn Wasteland, and I start playing through that game. I let both spheres resolve, I believe. I just wanted to play through them and just continue to hit land drops and Moxen. I believe I was really rewarded for not countering the spheres, as I was able to counter a Null Rod later on, because I definitely needed the Mox mana to be able to play my spells through Double Sphere. So I play a nice slow game, building out my mana base, and then winning with a big 4th Airlingas. Then game 2 happens. And so game 2 starts with a deck check. And I'm like, all right, this is fine. No worries. I haven't done, I haven't really changed my deck since Oklahoma. So it shouldn't be a problem with a deck check. Wrong. I have a deck reg mistake or a card in my deck mistake. And this is a very interesting thing to talk about because this is not how Magic has always been. In my deck, I was playing with a Polluted Delta, which is functionally a blue fetch land that fetches all of my blue things, and that's it. In my deck list that I registered, I was playing with a Scalding Tarn. Exact same functionality as Polluted Delta and a 1/1. So there are basically no differences besides Needle, kind of name. And so what the judge says is I either accidentally have the wrong card in my deck, or I registered my deck wrong. If I registered my deck wrong, I get a game loss. If I have the wrong card in my deck, I just need to put a Scalding Tarn into my deck and swap it out for a Delta and get a warning. This is very interesting to me because that's not how I played Magic for a very long time now. I think for the majority of the years that I've played competitive Magic, that would just be a game loss no matter what. So recent rule changes have definitely led to Magic being more friendly to newer players playing in competitive, and especially towards inoffensive mistakes. And so because the judge can determine that I am not trying to gain any tactical advantage by doing this, they can just fix the mistake and everyone continue playing, which I thought is great. I mean, obviously that's a big win for me. I assumed I was just going to get a game loss. So, no game loss for just like, I think I swapped boxes because I don't know if I registered a Tarn in Oklahoma City. I know I had to move all of my Tarns into my sneak attack deck. So I had thought I put a Delta in my vintage list so that I wouldn't have to move cards back and forth. Let's see. Yeah, so I have a Delta registered in Oklahoma City. So that's exactly what it was. And I must have, yeah, so I registered a Tarn this time, so I didn't have to move my Delta like I did in Oklahoma City. I didn't have to move my, no, that doesn't make sense either. I'm trying to figure out how I messed up here. And I obviously, because it's my mistake. Yeah, I don't know. I just have a Tarn in this list. I think online I usually play with a Misty and a Tarn. So it must be I just copied my online list instead of my Oklahoma City list. That must be what it was. So either way, we have a huge long deck check. We move on from that with just a warning, and we play out our game 2. My opponent mulligans and picks kind of a bit of like an anemic hand, I would say. That is kind of on the back of Null Rod. Almost entirely on the back of Null Rod, and my opening hand had a portable hole. So I was able to answer the portable hole and build out a huge advantage in terms of just like playing all my lands and playing my mana, and eventually I'm just going to cast Flame of Venors and win. Some unfortunate things did happen in this event, or in this round, in this game, where I messed up. I made a mistake, and my opponent cast Null Rod and Grafdigger's Cage on turn 1, and I just kind of, put that out of my mind because, my opponent also had a Caracas, so I was never going to be able to Lurrus, right? So I just like, okay, yeah, I'm never, this cage is not a piece of cardboard that I need to think about, and I just kind of put it to the back of my mind. In that game, I cast Time Walk to build out my mana, and then I cast Snapcaster Time Walk to build out my mana. And so not a super consequential game action, but an illegal game action. I'm not allowed to flashback Time Walk with a cage in play. I missed it. My opponent missed it. The 2 judges that were standing and watching missed it. The 4 to 5 people who were standing and watching missed it. Everyone missed it. But I feel like it's still mostly on me to make sure that doesn't happen. So I was so mad at myself for that. And I apologize to Killian, and I'm gonna apologize again. That's kind of, I think it's unacceptable from my side of the table. But I thought about it for a little bit. I'm like, can we fix this? Can we do anything about this? And by the time we had realized that I had time walked through a cage, I had already PO'd or I was in the process of POing for 5, like 2 or 3 turns had passed. The judge was like, we're definitely not going to rewind this. I think if I hadn't gone so many turns, I would have definitely tried to make an effort to rewind it with my opponent and see if we can just get back to a correct game state. But we were like, I had drawn 6 cards since then. So it was too much to rewind, and I was like, well, maybe I should concede because I'm the one who made an illegal choice. But I don't think the choice had any impact on the game. I think this game was already won, and the actions that were going to happen were all still going to happen, and it didn't really make a lot of sense to me. So I didn't, and I ended up, of course, just playing through this PO and destroying all my opponent's permanents and winning the game with a 4th Eralingas. But yeah, definitely an unfortunate thing to happen. It's you're playing a game of Magic and you're not robots. These things will happen, but obviously a lot of how I play the game in terms of communication, I want to make sure I do things like make sure that my tokens, I have at least a copy of one of the real tokens so that people can see that it has Trample Haste on it, so they can see that the Thundertrap Trainer token has a 1/1. I want to play a game of Magic that is not influenced by things that are not Magic, right? And so like I do a lot of extra communication to make sure that's the case. And so the fact that we missed it was super disappointing, and I was like really disappointed in myself for that too. But I was able to, like I said, beat Killian here, and that was only game 2. With that, I moved to 5-1, and I had the highest breakers, and I was paired up against Josh, who had the second highest breakers, and I decided that it was safe. It's very safe for me to draw, and pretty safe for Josh to draw. And we draw into top 8. Top 8 is where things get fun. Okay, so here we go. Here we have the top 8. Really powerful top 8. Lots of really strong players here. Lurrus PO, Lurrus PO, Lurrus PO, Esper Lurrus, Lurrus Breach, Raker Shops with PO, normal Raker Shops, and Lurrus PO. For the sake of everyone, straight away, this top 8, I'm not going to name anyone by name, nor am I going to name vendors by name for what we talk about in this. I just wanted to tell people what happened because it's very much something that people are going to be wondering about, and people want to know. Because when you have a tournament like this, where the first place prize is a Black Lotus, this is $10, $12, $14,000 Magic card. And the second place prize is $400 store credit. It is not the easiest thing to navigate. And a lot of the players in the top 8 were, interested in splitting the prize pool up so that it was less of a difference between winning and losing, which is totally reasonable. The TO was obviously not very interested in helping facilitate those prize splits because it's very challenging to do that with one paper card. That being said, the TO did do a bunch of help in trying to let that happen organically, and we'll talk about that. So we get into this top 8, and immediately some players are asking, can we look at maybe splitting this prize up so that it's less volatile? And multiple players, at least 2, maybe 3 players, said they were not willing to do a prize split in the top 8 and wanted to play out that round. So with even one person who does not want to prize split, you're going to play out your round. So with multiple, we definitely were playing out the top 8. So the top 8 happens, and I'm paired against Adria, and he's on Esper Frog, and I'm going to review that match in another video because it was the feature match for the event. But in my opinion, this match went very much how the typical matchup goes, in my opinion, where game 1, I'm able to try to fit through a very powerful PO with Moxen and go over the top. And then game 2, when my opponent goes to stop my powerful cards with things like Null Rods and Deafening Silences, I play a more controlling game plan where I'm boarding out forces and that kind of thing. So I'm able to win the quarterfinals 2-0, where we move to top 4. And so in top 4, the topic of splitting is once a game's come up. There are still players in the top 4 who are interested in playing it all the way out for a Black Lotus. One of the players was really interested in, this is like his only chance to win a Black Lotus. I'd really like to win it. Me personally, I'm in a very privileged position in my life where I don't think losing a match of Magic over a Black Lotus is going to be a huge impact on me. But one thing that I really wanted to do in the top 4 was make sure that everyone else was very comfortable with that. Because I know that I can make that decision based on my current privileged position in life, but not everyone else is going to have that ability. When you're getting to this point, you're talking about thousands of dollars. Thousands of dollars can be very life-changing money for people. So I wanted to make sure that everyone was cool with the ideas of what was happening here. This is when we were informed by the TO that the TO had done something really awesome. The TO had gone around to every one of the booths, the vendor booths during the event, and solicited, is that the right word? Maybe. Blind bids, cash credit blind bids for the Lotus. So it was kind of shown to us that if you do split, there is a vendor, these are what the vendors will give you for the Lotus. And I think this is a little bit a part where the miscommunication starts happening, is that although all these vendors know that they have bid on the Lotus, they don't know if they don't know if they were the highest bidder or not. They don't know that a Lotus is coming to their table to be sold to them based on their previous offer. And that, I think, maybe could have been communicated to all the parties a little bit better. So at this point, we actually are shown because we are considering splitting, we are shown the blind bids, and one of the bids was higher than the rest, and it was a number that was a significant number in cash. Enough so that we thought it was a very good deal, and we're considering splitting more. This is where I was like, okay, let's talk about, is this okay with everyone? Does everyone want to do this? Does anyone need to do this? Is more of what I wanted to make sure. I wanted to make sure no one was like going to be devastated by playing out this top 8. And one of the players kind of, to me, I felt like they were saying that they did really, really want to split for that reason. That didn't exactly end up being the case for that player. I think they were more trying to convey similar sentiment to me, that it could be, life-changing money that someone could need. But I didn't really pick up on that. So maybe, communication is hard. So although I think I was very interested in playing this all the way out for a Lotus and a trophy, I was under the impression that someone really could use the split. It would be better for us to all split. So we split. What does that mean? That means that we're going to take the Lotus to the vendor who bid the highest and sell them the card. And then we were going to split the proceeds of that sale. And realistically, we want that to happen the same night so that no one has a Lotus and everyone is all settled and everyone can go their separate ways on the next day and it all will be done. But that doesn't get to happen right away because there's still a top 8 to be played. There's still a trophy to be won. There's still card interviews to talk about and all of that stuff. So all of that happens first, but what no one does is no one goes and tells the highest bidder that they have won the highest bid and the sale is likely going to happen tonight. So another area of communication, maybe that could be improved. So what happens is we play our top 4. We've all agreed to split this prize at the bid that the highest bidder had, and we play top 4. I play against Josh on Rigger Shops. There's some funny pictures on the internet because it was quite the blowout. Let's see if I can pull it up. It's a good picture. I think I have a picture too somewhere of his hands in his head. But yeah, here's a picture. It's kind of a funny one. I kill my opponent on turn 1. I go for like an aggressive start and I actually cast divination. I cast Flame of Anor, draw 2, because I know that I have like the ability to time walk. And so with that Flame of Anor, draw 2, I draw enough cards and I find the PO. And so on my time walk turn, I PO and I make exactly enough to exits equal to 10 4th Air Lingas for 20, kill my opponent with their very strong, reasonable keep here. And so I won game 1. Let's see, actually, I have notes for this one because this one was not on camera. And then game 2 happens, and I think I kept a little bit maybe of an anemic hand, and my opponent had like a very, very strong raker draw, and I wasn't able to come back from it. And then game 3 happens, and it's a back and forth. It's playing out. My opponent has a crawler that I'm letting stay in play, so I can draw some more cards and build out my mana. And it's a pretty cordial back and forth because we've already split. We already know we all have the money, and we think we have all the money, and we just want to, just play out the match and have fun. And I make a crucial complete blunder. I go to the point where my saga is finishing, and I'm getting a Black Lotus with it. And on my turn, I'm going to cast Flame of Anor, killing the Scrawling Crawler, which is the last piece of draw action, and the Time Vault, which is the last opponent's last chance of winning the game with Vault Key. And then from there, I will win the game. But what I didn't do is I forgot about Chalice of the Void. And so I saw my Lotus in play. So I'm like, oh yeah, I have a Lotus in play. So I'll go Luris Lotus. And it's a free action I can take between Flame of Anoring for the win. But there's a Chalice in play. So I buy the Luris, I cast the Lotus, and he's like, there's a Chalice in play. And I'm like, oh, okay, I die. I can't actually, at that point, cast my Flame of Anor, killing the Time Vault. So he just gets a key and wins. And so just a blunder, not very focused. These are the excuses, but these are also the reasons. I just make a huge mistake and lose the top 4. In the other top 4 match, Gabe beats Ryan on Breach. And then Gabe plays against Josh in the finals, and then Joshua ends up winning. So the Raker Shops deck does, in fact, take down the whole tournament. So the tournament finally ends, and it might be a couple hours past when we split. I had actually gone off and played the EDH event, the content creator EDH event. I had played my 1 round and came back. And so we finished the tournament, and we go and we take our Lotus to the vendor who had the highest bid. And that vendor is already basically closing up for the night, already basically, ready to leave. And obviously that vendor had no idea that he had the highest bid. So, he was not super keen on, okay, I need to, he doesn't have the cash to pay out 4 people right now. Why are these people coming up to me, asking for money, expecting that I give them money, some communication there. But the end all be all of it was that vendor was not going to pay for a Black Lotus at that point in time and that point of the night. Which came as a surprise to all of us because we thought what was meant by this bid was that they knew that this was all happening and knew that they were going to be buying a Lotus at the end of the night. And so now we are all concerned because, well, a lot of the vendors are leaving. There are not going to be very many vendors left in the hall who can do this. What's the next highest bid? What can we do? We don't. If we can't sell this today, is everyone going to be back tomorrow? If everyone's going to be back tomorrow, who's going to hold on to the Lotus overnight? And so it's kind of an unfortunate situation where a lot of things are riding on it for a couple different people. And this is where we're going to shout out Card Cash, who did end up buying this Lotus. Card Cash had one of the highest bids, but it had some store credit involved, so the players were more interested in the full cash offer. Tio was able to help us call Card Cash and have him come back before he fully left the hall. And Jared from Card Cash on the spot paid everyone out, and everyone left that night with their money for the Lotus, and everyone was happy. And that wasn't something that he had to do here. He did not have to do that. And so I want to, although I'm not naming names for anyone else today, I am going to shout this dealer in particular, because I think they went above and beyond to make sure that the players in the event had a good time and no one left home upset about it. So big shout out, big props to Card Cash for helping us out there. And so all four of us were able to split this Lotus in 4 ways at a very good price, and everyone got home happy as winners of the event. Obviously, the trophy went to Joshua, who ended up winning with the Raker shops over the rest of the top 8. But we were all, I would say, the winners of a Lotus. And that's how it all went down. That was the tournament. That was the drama. That was the judge calls and all of those things. It felt like a lot at the time, because it was, more of a higher stress situation at the end of the day, a long day of playing Magic. But in the end, what I want to convey is that this was a great tournament. Shout out to Excalibur Events for hosting this Steel City Spectacular. This was not a vintage main event. This was a CEDH event, the largest CEDH event ever, 514 players, that there happened to be, and the TO was willing to host a large vintage tournament at it. 100 players and then a 50-player 3K on Sunday are great numbers. And I've talked with the TO a little bit, and I'm hopeful that in the future we'll be able to host maybe some more vintage events at these CED events. I know for a lot of TOs, it's not really reasonable to host a vintage main event. Vintage now gets tacked on to legacy events. I would say that's true for Eternal Weekend, and now to maybe CEDH events. But if they're done well and the vintage community is, responsive to what's happening, I think these events can succeed and bring in a bunch of different players that maybe normally wouldn't be attending the events. So I will be on the lookout for more vintage events in the future. I'm always willing to, post and help do advertising for vintage events, because all I want is for vintage events to keep happening. I want vintage players to have the ability to play with their cards, introduce new players to the format, and have a good time. Overwhelmingly, the players I talked to at this event had a great time. I talked a bit with Ryan in the top 8, who is not a vintage player. Ryan's a very strong player who plays other formats, and he expressed to me that he had just an unbelievable time playing the vintage format with the players who are playing the vintage format, who are typically less cutthroat is part of it, but it's just are happier to be there and express that happiness in a way that makes other players want to be there as well. These are community events. These are fun hobby events, and making sure everyone has a good time, I think, is a big priority for both players and TOs. So yeah, shout out to the TO and of course the judge staff, who ran a really smooth event. Everyone had a great time. I'm very happy to have actually fulfilled part of my promise to myself, which was, with all of these events hosting this year, NYSE, Oklahoma Land Run, and this event all putting up power for prizes, I was hoping to win one of them, and I would say I personally count this one as a win. I do think that there's still some room for tournaments to be a little bit wider on prizes in a way that still draws players in. I think an event that I would be interested in trying to convince TOs to run is maybe a battle for jewelry where you put up 5 Moxen instead of a Lotus. This keeps the entry fee more reasonable than something like an NYSE, but keeps the prizes substantial, and players will show up for Moxen. They want these power. Like, one of these players was, interested in getting power so they could play Eternal Weekend, and has won multiple pieces of power. In fact, took his Pro Tour winning Cloud, turned it into I believe it was a Sapphire, and then took the winnings from this Lotus event and turned it into an Ancestral. And so when you have these Moxen events, they're not always going to be, everyone splits and takes home money. Sometimes they are going to be players get their first piece of power and start building towards playing actual paper vintage at Eternal Weekend. And I think that's a beautiful thing. And I want to hope that continues. So that's my recap of the event. Stay tuned. I'll put out another video where I'm going to do both of my feature matches and cover them in depth. So if you want to see some paper vintage being played with my commentary over it, we're going to do that in another video. Eternal Weekend is going to be the next major event. I will do a big, large metagame video for everyone before that event, and I will make that video available to $5 tier patrons and YouTube members ahead of time whenever I do decide to do that. I'll probably give it maybe a month or so to let the metagame settle with Tezzeret, see where we're at. It will definitely be ahead of Eternal Weekend, so that way everyone knows what's going on in Vintage before the big event. Of course, I will continue doing Monday, Wednesday, Friday gameplay videos, so if you're interested in watching more Vintage, we'll have those, and I'll see you then.